Hey guys, Eckhart's Ladder here. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Starship Versus, the series where we take two ships from the Star Wars universe, put them head to head, and try to predict which one would come out on top. Or at least that's what we do sometimes. On special days like today, we look at other universes and put them against ships from Star Wars, and today we are doing my most requested matchup of all time. Really, it's no surprise to me that you guys have been asking for this matchup for so long, because we're talking about two famous ships from probably the two most iconic science fiction franchises of all time. And more than just that, two franchises which traditionally have had a bit of competition with each other. We're talking, of course, about Star Wars and Star Trek. So in today's matchup, we're taking the Imperial II class Star Destroyer and putting it against the USS Enterprise. And I kind of struggled for a while trying to decide which Enterprise I wanted to use. I was originally going to use the Enterprise-E, but I'm a little bit more familiar with the Enterprise-D, so that's what we're going to go with today. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at what would happen if these two ships somehow managed to land in the same universe and had to fight it out in a one-on-one space battle to the death. I know this battle has been done a few times on YouTube before, but I'm going to do things a little bit differently. Instead of focusing on the characters of Star Wars and Star Trek and actually battle tactics, I'm just going to look at the two ships themselves to try to determine which one is actually superior. If it helps you out, just imagine that each of these ships are being piloted and crewed by equally skilled clones. If you want to see a more story-driven episode focusing on the characters of each universe, check out Generation Tech's video on the Enterprise-E versus the Imperial Star Destroyer. He does a good job and it's really a lot of fun. Also, of course, let him know that you were sent by Eckhart's Ladder. I've put a link down in the description. It's very hard to compare these two universes for a few reasons, and the first is that whichever way I decide, I'm going to have people that are frustrated with me. You know, you guys are huge fans of both Star Wars and Star Trek, and you get understandably a bit miffed if your universe loses out in a matchup. I've been accused of both being a Star Wars fanboy and of purposely making Star Wars ships lose. I've also been accused of being pro-Empire, pro-Mon Calamari, everything. Please keep in mind that I am doing my best. I'm trying to be as fair as possible, but this matchup is very difficult to decide. You know, we've got two universes that operate very, very differently, and it's hard to establish a baseline of power. What I mean by that is this: both universes use vastly different technology, and making matters worse, they also have cross sections and tech manuals which give totally inconsistent and unrealistic numbers. Star Trek in particular also changes the power of its weapons or its shields or just its technology generally depending on the plot situation it's in, but that's completely understandable. I mean, it's a TV show, things need to be done for dramatic effect. I guess what I'm trying to say is this: both universes use completely different technology, so it's actually really difficult to predict how one ship would react to the weaponry and the shielding of the other ships. Nonetheless, I will try my best. I will say that I'm not going to be using fan calculations from either StarDestroyer.net or other forums. I've just found that generally they are ridiculously biased and they make really questionable assumptions based on very limited data. As science fiction fans, there needs to be a recognition that when we watch a TV show or a movie, things are done for dramatic effect and they don't necessarily always portray the true power of these vessels. So with all that being said, I'm going to compare these ships in two categories. Usually I do three, but because today's matchup is kind of weird, I'm going to keep it to two. The first category is weaponry and shielding, and basically the question there is, how can these ships actually harm each other? Then I'll also be looking at intangibles, so anything that's not strictly a weapon or anything that's not strictly a shield. So let's start with the first section, and the question that I think we're really asking here is one of these universes vastly overpowered or somehow different than the other one, such that its weaponry will be completely effective and the weaponry of the other universe will be non-effective? The first thing I want to briefly mention is a line from the episode The Outrageous Okana from Star Trek The Next Generation. In that episode, after encountering a small freighter, Captain Picard says lasers can't even penetrate our navigation shields. Don't they know that? This has long been held up by Star Trek fans as proof that the weaponry and the shielding in the Star Trek universe is superior to that in the Star Wars universe. Well, I don't really buy this. For one, just because one type of laser weapon would not have been effective against the Enterprise's shields does not mean that all laser weapon will not be. We know that Star Trek weapons are based on subatomic particles, so that laser weaponry development most likely stagnated. That's probably where the quote comes from. Further to this point, we also see a Borg cube do serious damage to the Enterprise with a cutting beam, which is itself a laser-based weapon. Further to me, I think it's also pretty unclear whether Star Wars lasers are actually lasers in a scientific sense. Some people claim that they're definitely not and go so far to say that they're definitely superheated plasma, not laser. I mean, that's not clear to me and I don't think that's ever been definitively said, but they don't appear to operate like lasers do in the real world. Another unique and divergent Star Trek technology is the use of transporters, and it could be argued that all the Enterprise really needs to do is transport key components of the Star Destroyer out, or transport a strike team into a key location to do serious damage, etc. However, transporters are notoriously fickle. We know that they don't work when shields are up, so at least at the beginning of the battle, the transporter won't be able to bypass the shields of the Star Destroyer. When actually looking at the weapons of the two ships, we see that the Star Destroyer has over 100 heavy turbo lasers, ion cannons, and regular weapons. The Enterprise-D, on the other hand, has a dozen phaser arrays and 250 photon torpedoes, which can be launched through 2 separate tubes. Clearly, the Star Destroyer has more numerous weapons, but are they more powerful? I think that is the key question. How do we figure out which universe has more powerful weapons? Well, in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, The Die is Cast, we see a Romulan ship do serious damage to a planet in just under a minute. These weapons wouldn't be the exact same as the ones on the Enterprise, but they would be arguably comparable. Arguably though, we don't see any sort of similar level of destruction from Star Trek weaponry on other occasions, so perhaps this is an outlier, and I don't think I really take it as being completely indicative of the weaponry power. However, I will say we do also know that Starfleet has an Order 24, which is the orbital bombardment of a planet such that all life is destroyed. We've seen this threatened a couple of times, both in the original series, once when a character was insane, and once when a character was bluffing, but it's not actually clear to me if this is actually doable by a single ship. Similarly, various Star Wars works when talking about base Delta Zeros argue that a Star Destroyer could do serious damage to a planet from space in a very quick time. But again, we never really see it, and to me it's all just speculation. To me, the feats aren't really there to outright say that one set of weaponry is more powerful than the other. So I think it might be helpful to look at the two universes generally to see if we can establish some sort of baseline power based on their technology. So, which universe is more technologically advanced? On Star Wars' side, the first thing we can point to is hyperspace. Hyperspace is much faster than Star Trek's warp. I mean, instead of it taking a decade to go across the galaxy, you can do so in days to weeks. Arguably, Star Wars is also much more industrialized. We see that the Galactic Empire at one point was able to control, at a least semi-effective basis, millions to billions of planets. The Empire also made serious progress on the second Death Star in mere months, and also showed an ability to construct other large projects like Super Star Destroyers and other superweapons. However, Star Trek also has very, very impressive technology. I mean, they have holodecks, food replicators, and transporters. Things we don't really see in the Star Wars universe, at least not within the Empire. We also see that both universes have the ability to create very advanced robotics. I mean, take Data and put him against IG-88. It's hard to say which one is smarter or more effective, they're just very different. Both universes also have examples of weapons that are able to completely destroy a planet or do even more damage. It's really hard to separate these two universes, but I am going to give the technological edge, albeit only very, very slightly, like just a sliver, to the Star Wars universe, because I think the Empire has shown a use in both their science and their engineering of higher levels of energy. So let's now talk about intangibles, and there are quite a few things that I would like to very briefly touch on. The first is speed. I think it's very clear that the Enterprise would, at least relativistically, move faster than the Star Destroyer. Some people argue that it could also do damage to the Star Destroyer well in warp speed, such that it would be impossible for the Star Destroyer to actually hit it. I'm not an expert on this, I'm not convinced that it would be possible, and I'm not going to allow it for this matchup. Star Trek sensors also are vastly, at least apparently, more advanced than those in the Star Wars universe. That kind of comes also from the scientific nature of the Enterprise. So that will certainly give that ship an advantage, although I don't think that they will be advanced enough to somehow disable or shoot through the Star Destroyer's shields. Another thing that we could consider is firing range, but I don't really think it's been explicitly stated how far away Star Wars ships typically are in a battle. I will say though that it seems like Star Trek ships are more effective from far away. The last thing that I want to talk about, and this will also bring me into the actual matchup, is the role of these two ships. And assuming that these two ships are from universes of around equal power, this matchup is totally unfair. That's because the Star Destroyer is a warship. It's meant primarily and pretty much solely for fighting other ships. The Enterprise, however, is not a dedicated warship, and although it can certainly not only hold its own but also kick ass in a fight, it is a multi-role vessel with focuses also on science and exploration. This, I think, brings me to my decision. The Enterprise-D is only half the size of a Star Destroyer and, in my mind, is not as optimized for direct battle. That wouldn't have necessarily been fatal if there was something within the Star Trek universe that indicated to me that it would still be able to take on the Star Destroyer, but I just don't really think that there is anything. Even without looking at some of the more exaggerated or ridiculous parts of the expanded universe, or having to resort to fan calculations, I think it's clear that the Star Wars universe deals with very high levels of energy. I will say that technology in the Star Trek universe does have a sort of nice precision to it, but that doesn't mean I'm convinced that it's more powerful. So this is what I think happens. The two ships come out of hyperspace and face off against each other. The Enterprise has an immediate speed advantage, but it has to deal with hundreds of weapons coming from the Star Destroyer. I mean, I'm talking about dozens of ion cannons and probably hundreds of turbo lasers and heavy turbo lasers. The Enterprise will be able to avoid much of the fire from the Star Destroyer, and a lot of this comes from the fact that, unlike in the Star Trek universe, individual guns in Star Wars are still controlled by people. But I think just the sheer amount of power outputted by the Imperial II, based on the fact that it is a very large dedicated warship, will be too much for the Enterprise to overcome. I think while its phasers and photon torpedoes would eventually be enough to overwhelm the shields of the larger ship, they won't do so quickly enough to survive the heavy barrage from the Imperial II. I think the only chance that the Enterprise has is if it can get great distance between the two ships and fire on the Star Destroyer with its weapons. I'm not necessarily convinced that the Star Destroyer will be out of range and then it won't be able to hit the ship, but I mean, we've seen it have difficulty with ships like the Millennium Falcon, so it is possible. I notably haven't talked about the Star Destroyer's TIE fighters yet because I really don't think they'll be very effective. I'm pretty sure the Enterprise can pick them out of the air with relative ease, but again, I don't think it will be able to do so to the main cruiser. And I think that that's where this battle ends, so I'm going to give the Star Destroyer a not decisive but still pretty convincing victory with 7.5 wins out of 10. I've left a little chance for the Enterprise because perhaps I am underestimating their weapons, and the planet-destroying abilities shown in that one episode that I mentioned earlier are actually the standard. In that case, the Star Destroyer would probably be in a bit more trouble. But yes, as of right now, I'll give it to the Star Wars universe. But, of course, this is just one man's opinion. I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments who you think would win. Let me know if I misinterpreted some technology from either Star Wars or Star Trek, if you think that the Enterprise would have won, if you think that the Star Destroyer would have won, or, if you think I just did a good job. Also, take a second right now to vote in the upper right hand corner, and I'll reveal the poll results at the end of next video. If you haven't already, please also comment with any future matchups that you'd like to see down in the comment section, and if you see a matchup that you'd like to see get done, give it a like and a supporting comment. If you'd like to get further involved in the community, you can also follow me on Twitter, donate to my GoFundMe page, but only if you really have the extra money because I've met my initial goals, and follow me on Twitter, join the Discord. I don't know which one I already said. Anyways, thank you for watching, guys. As always, may the Force be with you.